Good morning, everyone. I am David Sneed, the President and CEO of the amazing Handel and Haydn Society in Boston. Thank you so much for coming this morning with Kate Prescott, our market researcher, and Lily Deschan, our VP of Finance and Administration, to kind of tell you about the DEI journey that we've been on at H&H. Now, I want to say at the beginning, I don't think we have all the answers. If you're expecting that, I'm sorry. We're in progress right now because, of course, we lost a year of concerts due to COVID, so things are still yet to be done. We have a lot of things we're doing that we want to report on. I don't pretend to believe that a lot of this is stuff you aren't already doing. So don't think we just invented, just found the magic formula. But I think what's interesting about this, hopefully, is the process, the sort of data-driven way that we've gone about thinking about diversifying the audience as a driver for organizational change and evolution. So that's really what this is about. This is not about convincing you why this is important. We already know that. That's why you're here. It's sort of about how we've been implementing a plan to diversify the audience and also the organization. So I want to start off by just a few slides about context about H&H. This work is not happening in a vacuum. It's not just one thing off by itself. We're doing DEI over here and other stuff over here. This is one element of an entire organizational strategy called Relentless Relevance. I get that name from a guy named David Ocker, who is a professor of marketing up the road at Berkeley. And the idea is to optimize everything about your organization 360 degrees around optimizing customer value and mattering more to more people as a way of getting people to come to concerts. If you don't matter to them, it's much harder to get them to come, and then getting them to come back, and then developing loyalty and eventually becoming donors. As David Ocker wrote, after spending much time studying brands, he said, "It's astounding how much of what's spent on marketing has no impact on growth. What grows market share is relevance." So the key idea here is relevant. How do you use all the tools you have at an orchestra to create a connection, become relevant to people at a personal level? Relevance we're talking about here is not about greater social good and doing great things in the community, although that's very, very important. It's definitely part of it. What we're talking about here is creating a personal connection with someone such that you matter to them, and that's why they come to your concerts. So a little bit about H&H. We're the oldest performing arts organization in the country, founded in 1815, just finished our 207th consecutive season. We perform Baroque and classical repertoire, so basically 1600 to 1850-ish, kind of Monteverdi to Mendelssohn. And we perform on period instruments, historically informed way, so gut strings, natural horns, valveless trumpets, all that stuff. And we're an orchestra and a chorus. So everything I just told you says we're old, right? So the question is, how do you make this organization relevant to Boston in 2022? And that's what this story is really about. Just looking at the organization overall, I think if you want to become relevant to someone, you start off by learning about them and listening. So we started off with market research in Boston in 2016 to understand the Boston classical music market and how H&H fits into that. And we found some interesting things. First of all, there was very, very low awareness of H&H in the market, 6% unaided awareness. So we weren't on people's radar at all. The fact we played on period instruments, people didn't know that. The fact we played Baroque and classical music, they didn't know that either. Basically, if you ask people in the market, and this is people, by the way, who were into classical music in Boston, tell us about H&H. The top answer was, I don't know much about you. That was their main response. So also, though, great opportunity, right? On the plus side, attendees, very, very high concert satisfaction. People really loved the idea of connection between the orchestra and the audience, they felt. Also, we found 25% of the market was inclined to attend H&H when they found out what we did. Baroque classical, period instruments, yeah, that's interesting, I might come. I just don't know about you. So that then led to an overall strategy to position the concert experience not as an escape. A lot of orchestras say, escape the everyday by coming to our concerts. We're not about unplugging, we're about plugging in. It's about promoting an active connection between music, musicians, composer, and audience. We talk about immensely engaging, emotionally moving, and joyfully uplifting concert experiences that are historically informed, masterly performed, and passionately shared. All that came from the research. That's what that audience told us they were looking for. The good thing is it's really true. I mean, if you go to an H&H concert, I think this is what we hear from the audience about what the experience is like for them. By the way, great attendance today. There's going to be a lot of data, a lot of slides. You're all going to get this in the app, so don't worry about taking notes or reading all the slides. You'll get them for your very own. So the way this was executed was we went from brochures like this. Again, we're trying to be immensely engaging, emotionally moving, joyful, uplifting, from this to this to this, showing the connection, and this cover this year, much more intimacy. We do talk about the period instruments in the brochure. We also did videos on the website about the musicians and their instrument, and we sold just gobs of tickets. So that's all background. The interesting thing about today is what we also found in the research, which was that our audience was way, way underrepresentative of the actual disposition of the classical music market in Boston. 20% of the classical music market in Boston were people of color. Our audience was only 12%. So why is that? Why aren't they coming again? This is a survey of people who like what we do, and they're not coming. So the question was, what does H&H do to become more relevant to classical music enjoyers of color? And to find that out, we decided to go, as we always do, go back and just ask them, talk to people, find out what they tell you, and then act on it. And so with this, Cynthia, we need to toggle to the other presentation, Kate's presentation, who will now walk you through the data. I thought I could do all this myself, but with Cynthia here, I'm just going to take advantage of her.
This one?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Starting your screen share and
Okay.
can we get rid of that bar?
Yes, I can do that actually.
Thanks.
I'll go away.
Okay, hi. As David mentioned, this research was really about helping H&H become more relevant to people of color who enjoy classical music. And again, it's about attracting people to concerts. And so what we were doing was exploring the relationship between people of color, with the relationship people of color have with classical music and with concerts, identifying the barriers to attendance, and really looking for strategies to motivate attendance and increase engagement. We wanted to be really thoughtful. This was back in early 2017, and we wanted to be really thoughtful about this research because very little had been done with this audience at that point. And so we did a very comprehensive study. We included qualitative and quantitative. We had personal interviews. We sent people to concerts. We interviewed them afterwards. And then we followed up with lots of online surveys. For the qualitative, we partnered with another group who had a team of multicultural researchers because we wanted to make sure that we had their perspective on this whole topic. And so I'm just going to go through some overall findings and some of the recommendations and then turn it back to David. If I can move things ahead. Which one?
Click on it to start. No, you should be. Here we go.
Okay, great. So just a minute about the qualitative methodology because it was fairly complex. We started with in-depth interviews, and I shared the interviews with a woman from the other team who was a Black researcher. And so we brought in about 25 people across demographics and different ethnic groups. And we screened for people who enjoy classical music and attend the arts at least occasionally. And we covered lots of different topics from their habits, leisure habits, to relevance of classical music in their lives, or awareness and perceptions of H&H, and so forth. Then we brought in another 25 or so people, same kind of screening criteria, and we asked them all to go to an H&H concert because we wanted to understand the relationship between perception and reality in terms of what was going on. And we had a separate group of 25 because we didn't want to influence them with our pre-concert interviews. So we wanted some people to go in blind, right? And so we did that. They got to choose one of 4 concerts over the fall. Beethoven 9, a Beethoven Mozart program, Amadeus, the film, on period instruments, totally awesome, and Messiah. And so after they went, we did online post-concert surveys. And then Brenda and I followed up with a lot of them with in-depth telephone calls to further explore what their experiences were like. So I'm just going to talk about sort of 3 highlights from some of that work. One was that from the interviews, we found that everybody liked classical music, but wasn't their music of choice. And similarly with concert experiences, they would go to classical concerts, but preferred other things. So I would characterize it as latent interest in classical music somewhere below the surface for all of these people. Second, when they went to these concerts, they indeed looked at the audience and said, yeah, it's not like me, and yet they still felt very at home. They described the audience as older and not diverse, and yet they told us after the fact, you know, I found myself really bonding with the other audience members, and it was through the music and the joy of the experience. And sometimes they talked to people directly, and other times it was just the fact of being in the hall and experiencing this with other people. And third, everybody reported enjoying the concert much more than they expected. So they, pre-concert, they walked in saying, I'm not sure. And literally everybody came out saying that was much more or extremely more enjoyable than I thought. It reminded people about why they like to go to classical concerts. And they also found the entire environment of it extremely welcoming. So coming out of that research, I had the partner group write the report to ensure their perspective. And so their sort of overall conclusions were, after this, all this qualitative work, there's a significant opportunity for H&H to expand its audience of color. Respondents enjoyed the performances, they didn't feel left out, they felt there was inclusion on the stage, which they liked in the programming. They responded very favorably to the purity instruments and historical perspective. And after the concerts, virtually no one said, I'm not interested. That said, the research team felt that there'd be a substantial investment in time and resources in education, exposure, relevance, and motivation in order to accomplish this. So then, moving forward, we followed up with surveys in July of 18, and we had a random sample. We pulled people from a 25-mile radius of Boston Symphony Hall, where all the concerts are held. We again screened for people who at least enjoy classical music and attend at least one performance in a typical year. That incidence rate was actually 25%. So 25% of people that we talked to fell into both of those categories. We had a sample of almost 700 people, about equally split between people of color and white, because we wanted to compare the differences. And we also looked at differences across ethnic groups. I'm not going to talk a lot about that. I will say just in general, African-American, Black participants, respondents were slightly less involved in classical music than others, but most of the results were fairly split equally between the groups. So I'm not going to focus there. We asked everything, so we're not going to go through that. I am just going to talk about a little bit about brand awareness and attendance, motivations, barriers, perceptions of H&H, some of their experiences, and then look a little at the communications for the brand. This as context, this looks at overall arts attendance. So we asked people how many times, and like I said, you'll get the slides, and I'll read you don't have to worry about the individual numbers, but essentially this looks at how many concerts people go to in an average year. And what it essentially says is the POC sample is characterized by light arts attenders. And that's actually the same for the white sample, even more for that group. So you have the majority attending 1, 2, or no concerts in an average year. And additionally, we looked at a lot of media things, and only 17% of them indicated actively searching for information about arts and entertainment on a regular basis. So people aren't looking for us necessarily. We have to know that we have to work outwards. Additional context, we asked people about their classical concert enjoyment and classical music familiarity. And like we saw in the qualitative, the vast majority of these people really enjoyed attending classical concerts. On the other hand, a lot of the people are not that familiar with the genre and the music. Over 60% said, somewhat familiar or less. So context. Then we get into the brand, and here's the first H&H issue that we see. This is total brand awareness of many of the organizations in Boston, and H&H is down there at 28%. This was the most striking difference between POC sample and white sample, where the white audience was at 50%, so there was much higher awareness. And in general, that sample had higher awareness of sort of the major arts organizations in the area. Then we looked at perceptions of the organization. So here people could check all of these, whichever statements they felt strongly applied to H&H. So you see at the top, highly respectable, an excellent orchestra, source of pride in Boston. But the overall picture is that these numbers are all low and they're flat. So essentially it's saying people have low familiarity with the brand, who the brand is. And so for a lot of people, these are people who are aware of the brand. A lot of the people, they're aware in name only, right? So that's another issue. We did have a number of people who had been to H&H concerts in the past, about 20% at some point, and asked about their enjoyment. And like we saw in the qualitative, the vast majority had a wonderful time, enjoyed their concerts very much. Nobody said they didn't enjoy them. But if you looked at the non-attenders and expected enjoyment, it's far lower. You only have 10% saying, I'm going to love their concerts based on what I know about them. So there's another sort of issue there. And I think part of that goes to their perceptions of what it's going to be like, right? So this looks at perceptions of the H&H audience, who's in that audience. And this is among people who would attend POC sample, people who had attended H&H concerts. So they go, I think they're going to be really knowledgeable of classical music and they're going to kind of dressed up, but they also said very friendly from an audience standpoint, right? And relaxed versus stuffy was the other end. And they were less likely to say mostly white, mostly old, and mostly serious. Not so the non-attenders, right? So the non-attenders also said, yes, I perceive the audience to be very knowledgeable of classical music. They're probably going to be dressed up and very friendly and relaxed, goes whoop, and drops tremendously. And then you see this rise in mostly white, mostly old, and mostly serious. So there are significant issues in terms of perceptions of who's going to be in that room. We also asked general attendance inhibitors. So what holds you back from going to these concerts? And this was a sort of a check all apply list that we've grouped into areas. And the first thing you'll notice is there are lots of them. And when we see this in qualitative research, when we ask people about wanting to go to concerts, the barriers come readily to mind. So it's, oh, I would love to go to a concert, but those tickets are going to cost a lot and there's that parking and I'm not sure how to get there. And are we really going to like that? Maybe some other time, sort of how it works. And so in this case, you have very high on the inhibitor list is financial, primarily perceived ticket prices. You also have uncertainty about what the experience is going to be like and the performance. Lack of interest in the genre, or at least relative to other variable or other activities. The environment and the atmosphere came up, just like what we just saw, and that was particularly true among the African American and Hispanic respondents, and other issues, personal things get in the way, transportation. To the point about financial and ticket prices, the other thing that we see all the time is that, yes, financial ticket price can be a real barrier for a lot of people, and we see that with younger people and lower incomes. It's also a perceptual barrier. This looks at, we asked people how much they would expect to pay for less expensive mid-range and more expensive tickets to H&H. And so H&H, the lowest end, the less expensive is, 25 to 29, mid-range is 50 to 56, higher is 75, tops 104. At the low end, people estimate $45 on average. And actually, so these lines are looking at what the lines say is that perceptions are actually all over the place. They don't know what it actually costs, but they vastly overestimate in general. So low end, the average was 45, medium price tickets, the average was 90. Most expensive tickets was 152. 70% of the people assumed that the tickets, high price tickets, were 100 or more, 70%. And that's particularly a problem because people want good seats. They don't know how much they cost, but they think they cost like twice as much as they do. So that's another huge barrier. And then there's the hall. This is people who hadn't been, so very few people of this sample had been to Symphony Hall in any frequency. This looks at the people who hadn't been or hadn't been in a really long time. And so how did they perceive it? Well, classy and beautiful, great, but formal, special occasion, and expensive, and not exciting, welcoming, comfortable, or for people like me. The good news is those people in that sample who had actually gone to Symphony Hall had much better perceptions, right? So the reality is better. You can see beautiful jumps way up, formal and special occasion go down, and exciting, welcoming, comfortable, and for people like me increase significantly. It's not beautiful here, right? There's still work to be done, but that actual experience really improves people's perceptions of the hall. One last thing within this sort of realm is we actually asked people of the POC sample what their suggestions would be for attracting people of color. We asked them about whether they have friends that go and that sort of thing. And so the primary response on an aided basis was, well, show more of us, more diversity, right? In both the performers and the programming, more Black artists of color, just, sorry, more African-American conductors, showing programs based on African-American culture, that sort of thing. Also, awareness and outreach came up, advertise where we are, local papers and community centers, partner with local organizations, and then a number of other issues. We then, just one last section, we switched to sort of looking at communications and who H&H says they are and how do people react to that. And so this was the brochure from the that year. There's the cover, masterly performed, passionately shared, the back cover with the performances, the inside spread with jeans photoshopped into the people in the first row. You can do that. You can do that. And H&H brochures always start on the first page with this copy that's about the brand. And so we had people read that. And so after looking at all of this, we said, based on that imagery, those words, that language, how appealing do you think H&H concerts would be? And so the people who had gone said, yep, really, really appealing, which is important because it means what they're doing and what they're saying rings true to their experience and what they enjoy out of it, right? So check. The people who hadn't been expectedly have lower ratings in terms of overall appeal, but still you have over half of the POC sample saying, I'd be highly interested in going based on what you just showed me, right? We exposed the idea of, explained what period instruments were, and then H&H does Baroque and classical. Also high interest in the period instrument idea, which we saw in the qualitative. Baroque and classical was a little lower, and we found out from other measure, Baroque is lower, but classical, interest in classical and earlier Romantic are really high. We went in a little deeper with some of the print ads, and these are ads from the previous year when we did the qualitative work. And so we showed people ads and then asked them about how well, what's your reaction to this way of promoting a concert to you. And so overall scores are really strong across 4 ads. I think it's interesting that African American, Hispanic, they were more strongly attracted, whoops, I went the wrong way, more strongly attracted to the Handel Hercules and the Beethoven 9 showing all the soloists. Surprise. We then went a little further and showed each of the ads and said, so what attracts you? What most attracts you to this ad? And that was on an open-ended basis, and we coded all the responses. And so for this particular ad, the vast majority of the responses were about the soloist pictures, not Beethoven Symphony No. 9, right? It was about these pictures. And so they said, you know, it's the photo of the bass baritone. I'm not used to seeing an African-American in a classical, but it's great. I was pleasantly surprised. Diverse soloists, the diversity catches my eye, how refreshing. And I think it was also the quality of the pictures, because you had people saying things like, nice to see a Black with braids. The photos of the singers are friendly and inviting. I love seeing the young, diverse faces. So it's not just it's what the pictures are. For this image, for this ad, again, people focused mostly on the image. That's what attracted to them. And that was split between 2 different things. One was the power of the emotion that he was expressing. And so people were, you know, just looking at him, he seems full of energy. He looks like he's putting it all. And again, it was who he is. It's not a white guy for once. It's an African-American, and so that tells me this is a diverse show, and it makes me feel comfortable to attend as an African-American woman. It features a Black person of color, and something you don't see much. And then lastly, I think it's really interesting, this one, this is Acelyn, the concert master, and again, people went to her in terms of the attraction, as opposed to Mozart and Beethoven. And it was for 2 reasons. One, her demeanor. They looked at her and said, she looks confident and proud. And she's saying, I'm going to blow your mind, right? And that is actually her personality. And the other was her appearance. The red hair, the red outfit tells me that this is not a show for stuck-up people and they're reaching out to young audiences. The hair color in the ad, because it tells me that they are welcoming towards all kinds of people. Her non-classical appearance is refreshing. And so all of those as a whole, I think, communicate the welcomingness of this brand. Okay, so lastly, how likely are you going to come based on everything you've seen? We showed them concept descriptions as well. And so those people with past experience, vast majority said, yep, highly likely to come. The people who hadn't been, it was expectedly lower, but you still have over 40% of the POC population of this sample saying, I'd be really interested in coming to those performances. So what does that all mean? It looks like, you know, the qualitative and the quantitative said there is certainly potential for diversifying the audience. In order to do that, it sounds like you need to minimize those barriers, leverage those strengths in order to motivate trial and repeat. And last, you know, create these lasting emotional connections. And so we just talked a little bit about how to do that. And I think it's important. There's lots of barriers, like I said, and we tend to sort of ignore a lot of them and say, well, it's out of our control. We still have to deal with them. And so in this case, you could look at them as practical, informational, and emotional. And the practical are the things like they're lighter arts attenders, they're less involved with classical music, they're less familiar with the category, and the other barriers. Still have to deal with it. And then there are informational, they don't seek out information, which we see with general market samples all the time. In terms of arts, we found no dominant media sources, either broad media or culturally specific. So that lends, also leads to that low awareness of the brand. Price perceptions, as we talked about. And then I think those emotional barriers, which are truly important, you know, this low expected enjoyment, questions about the atmosphere and the audience, all contribute to this resistance to attend. On the other hand, H&H has these strengths that they need to leverage. The communications were very appealing, so the strategy resonated. There was value in the period instruments. People liked and felt the communications were highly appealing and showed ethnic diversity, which was both surprising and affirming to them, which I think is important. We also found that the experiences were highly compelling, both sort of orally and visually to people. And we knew that people really had engaging and satisfying overall experiences. They enjoyed them, and that enjoyment improved those emotional barriers, right? So overall, it suggested a couple of major strategies, and I think they kind of go back to brand relationships 101. You know, it's about exposure, engagement, and experience. Clearly, you need to increase awareness of who H&H is and what they do, and shift those perceptions if you're going to get people in the door. You need to create greater connections in order to up the engagement, to be open to coming, and incentivize trial to get people in the door. And then obviously think about the experience from and enhancing it from a DE&I lens. And there's lots of tactics that you can do in all of those, and I'm not going to talk about them. You can get them, but I think, you know, literally, if you think about it, each level from exposure to engagement to experience, there's lots of things to do. Obviously, from an experience standpoint, increasing diversity on the stage in the programming and the musicians and H&H, the chorus, is really important, but there are lots of things you can do around that as well. So with all of that, then H&H turned their attention to developing this path to greater relevance, and we're gonna turn it back.
Okay. Cynthia, if you go back to the other presentation, I did want to say while we're doing this, I hope you're getting here that you know, the specific solutions for H&H are kind of idiosyncratic to us and who we are, but I hope that there's value in learning about the process and the philosophy of going out and learning about the audience you want to attract, and then building strategies based on that. There's some interesting things that we learned. There's hypotheses we kind of jettisoned. One, it was all about perceptions. You know, there was this perception that we were too expensive, but we're really not. And there was this perception that the hall experience was not welcoming and attractive, but the people who'd been said it wasn't. And then there was this perception of just not knowing much about us. So these are all things that we could address, which is good news, great news. And I think this work inspired a comprehensive, organization-wide, detailed, granular, specific plan, which was my goal. I have been through, I mean, many of you have, organizations that have the very nice flowery language about our goals and ambitions, what we want to achieve, but then what gets done? And this is about getting something done. Henry and I have been around too long to not get something done on this. So this along with other inputs led to this 63-point, I think it is, implementation plan of things we were going to do. Every item has an owner, it has a budget, and it has a timeline, and it's over 3 years. So I want to walk through that in a second. I wanted to start off though with this statement from our strategic plan, which has those lofty ambitions. The goal, it said, was to increase relevance to racially, ethnically, and socioeconomically diverse communities in Greater Boston by creating a welcoming and proactively inclusive institutional culture that embraces all people. Well, swell. You know, the question is, the issue is, how do you do that? So we, with the senior staff, and really led by Lily, our VP of Administration, okay, went through, and with the help of a consultant, Teresa Nelson at the Impact Seat, created over the course of several months this plan. I'm not going to go through the entire thing with you. I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights of every section, and maybe this will be helpful to you as you think about implementing DEI strategies and tactics back at your place. In the artistic area, we had 7 things we said we would do. One of them was to create a fellowship for period instrument musicians of color. if diversity is an issue in your symphony orchestra, it's really bad in pure instrument land. So we decided to go out and recruit musicians of great potential of color, just entering the field, and create an opportunity for them to work with H&H. And that was one of our major initiatives to get more diversity on stage in our orchestra. Same thing with the chorus. I said earlier, the chorus is a big part of H&H. Actually, like it's 40% or so of our concerts are with chorus. And so getting more diversity in the chorus is another big goal of ours. And also, we wanted to diversify the repertoire and also the soloists. So to get help with that, these are folks that have been helping us in that effort. First of all, Reggie Mobley, we hired as a programming consultant. Some of you may know, he is quite an amazing countertenor. And I have to say, you know, one of the great things we all have in this field is we get to work with really amazing, talented people. And Reggie is quite a very special person and artist, and he's been helping us learn more about repertoire that's not normally played from underrepresented composers, and he'll talk more about that at the end of this session. He's going to join us from Berlin. Anthony Tressa King joined us as a resident conductor of the chorus to help us identify more singers of color to join our chorus. Jonathan Woody is a composer in New York, and he, actually the inspiration of Reggie, worked with, over the course of history, Charles Ignatius Sancho, this really amazing man from London, 1770s, 1780s, escaped slave, became a composer, and wrote really, really wonderful music. And Jonathan arranged music of Sancho for us to perform our opening night concert last year, also on video. And Reggie will talk much more about that. In marketing, a lot of this, of course, was about, as I said, perceptions and communications. We decided we wanted to hire a marketing person specifically tasked with implementing the recommendations of this research to grow the audience of color and also a younger audience. We dedicated ourselves to informing all of our marketing and visuals and language to be more welcoming and inclusive. I know a lot of you are doing that already. Our new audience development manager was tasked with developing connections with DEI affinity groups in professional organizations, help introduce H&H to new audiences, partnerships with community organizations, more digital advertising to reach younger POC audiences, deal with the price issue, deal with the awareness issue, and so on and so forth. So that was in marketing. This is Michael Wark, the guy that we hired to do this job. We started in February. We're a year behind because we didn't have concerts for a year, but he started in February, and we do one concert a month. So we only had 3 concerts left when he started, but he has made connections with 80 affinity groups of professional organizations and has given them 600 tickets for people of color to come to H&H concerts this spring. Now, yes, gave them, but the point is we're just starting out. We're trying to create connections. So revenue is not the goal here. To get 600 people to come who hadn't come before, who are audiences of color, I think is a pretty good start. So Michael is working on that next year. And then showing communications, crossing the program that Reggie will talk about. This is our single ticket ads, as Kate mentioned. I think showing audiences of the kinds of people you want to attract are very important as well. Then in the education area, H&H has 7 youth choruses, 250 or so singers in those ensembles, and we established new standards for diversifying the membership and also the repertoire of those choruses. Also, to create scholarships for lower income students to come join those choruses. Also, many more concerts in outside of the hallowed Symphony Hall area to reach the audiences that we want to reach. In terms of development, and Mike Palouse is here, he can answer questions. We really focused on trying to find funding for our DEI programs, because there's several $100,000 now that are being spent on it every year. Really find organizations that are targeting the same kind of groups that we're targeting. Like, for instance, there's some health organizations that are concerned about the issue of heart disease among Blacks, and maybe there's a role for music to play in dealing with that. And so I try to create connections like that. A big part of it, though, was to find funding for our DEI program. And there's great news there. I mentioned the Fellowship for Peers and Musicians of Color. We have received a $1 million grant from a local foundation to fund that for 5 years. So that's really terrific. Get it by the union now, and hopefully in the fall we can get that program started. Now, infrastructure. What about hiring? What about staff and all of that? And Lily Deathchan, who is our VP of Finance and Administration, has really been running point on this, and I've asked her to talk about that.
Oh, thank you. You all thought I was going to be the one to talk about data, right? So, is this on? Okay. So I think first and foremost, DEI, everyone has a different understanding of DEI, right? So within an organization, we as an individual and as an organization have different understanding what DEI means: diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thanks to David's leadership, we're able to get support from the top, and we're able to implement this 63 plus tactics to achieve the goal that we have. We planned, we tested, and we implemented everything. So it's testing and measuring. And we found success in changing our hiring practice. Like, how do we do that? We start by being more welcoming in our employee handbook. Instead of telling folks what they can't do, our employee handbook has been amended and edited, actually completely overhauled, to be, here's how you can succeed here, no matter who you are. Part of our mission has the incredible phrase of "for all," right? It's not for classical music lovers, it's not for Bostonians, it's not for national, it's for all. So how do we embody that as an organization, not just from the infrastructure? It becomes part of our business as usual. Starts with our staff. And I mean full-time staff, part-time staff, musicians, and faculty. So they have to see representatives within ourselves in order to attract the audience we would like to have. So how do we do that? We established a baseline with folks. We implemented learning sessions, and I call them learning sessions because we're all adults. We don't need to be trained. So, right? So learning sessions, we basically tie them into what we're doing, what our community is doing, and how we see ourselves. And then we're working on a lexicon. We finalized it, David, just want to let you know. We're working on a lexicon that helps us define, H&H define what we mean when we say certain things. So that is woven into our communication plan as well as our strategic plan. I think there's another slide. So there's a long list of things, right? These things happened consistently, concurrently, and DEI is never ending. So as we keep moving, we keep improving how we think about it, what we're teaching our staff, what we're teaching our students, as well as the board work that we've been doing with our board and committees. And Jamie can talk about it when he does come and speak. But infrastructure doesn't just mean staff and us. It means the whole entire being of H&H. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, you'll all get this entire presentation so you can see all the details. I thought one interesting thing was the DEI dashboard, which you want to talk about that a little bit?
So the DEI dashboard measures, see, now I'm talking about data. So measures how we're performing against these goals that we have set for ourselves as owners. So infrastructure falls within my purview, so I can speak to that directly. Is this ongoing? Has it been halted? What's the progress? Is it in progress? Did we complete it? Once you complete something, you now have to think of how do we keep this ball rolling and then not have it. And we share that with our committee, our DEI committee, as well as our board, our progress. And we post that up on our webpage of where you can find us about H&H and DEI. So you can go to our website and see our commitment to DEI. So that dashboard helps us see at a glance, are we succeeding? Are we achieving these goals? And start conversations of why haven't we started this? Oh, the pandemic happened, like David said, about patrons and audience development. So now that we are doing more concerts, how are we measuring ourselves to these goals and tactics? And the dashboard helps us do that.
So this is the webpage we have about our DEI program. This is accessible directly from the homepage of H&H. And we put this up in March of 2021. And it says for each area of the organization, what our goals were. And then we report, as we updated it in February, of what we had done over the past year in artistic, in audiences, in education, and in staff and administration, and at the board level. So reporting to the community, keeping ourselves accountable for what we're doing. And now I think it's time to bring on, yeah. We have two guests with us. We're going to join us via Zoom. I think it's time for that. Jamie Hoyt is the chair of the DEI committee of the board, and he's going to join us. And we also have Reggie Mobley. Jamie's going to talk about the board perspective on the DEI work, and then Reggie's going to talk about the work he has done in involving the programming. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Jamie.
Okay, thanks so much.
Go for it.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. Well, thank you, David, Lily, and Kate. You know, and I might say at the outset that one of the exciting things for me early on in joining the board, which was right around the time that Kate was engaged and her team were engaged in the research that she described, the very detailed and impressive research, was the fact that H&H was committed to doing this, to finding out, you know, really what were the barriers to greater participation from an audience standpoint, which is kind of fundamental, it seems to me, for, you know, for the organization as a whole. And I might just say from our, for our board and our supporters, because our supporters are always interested in, among other things, you know, the flow of support, if you will, to the financial and otherwise. So anyway, doing that research was, I think, very important for all board members, and it was exciting for me. And when soon after joining the board, I was asked to chair the DEI committee, which I was glad to do. Diversity, equity, inclusion. It's kind of my, somewhat my bailiwick, if you will, over the years in many contexts. So, I'm pleased to talk about H&H's perspective, give you my perspective on H&H's DEI efforts. Now, the board has had a DEI committee since 2012. Its effectiveness, though, has increased markedly in recent years with the adoption of the current strategic plan in 2018 and the implementation plan that David and Lily talked about, that you heard about in 2020. One of the key features of the strategic plan from a DEI perspective was that DEI was not relegated to just one chapter of the plan or one section. Every section of the plan, from artistic to education to audience to infrastructure, had DEI strategies woven throughout. DEI was also in the new mission statement in the plan, quote, "The mission of H&H is to inspire the intellect, touch the heart, elevate the soul, and connect all of us with our shared humanity through transformative experiences with Baroque and classical music." What was needed, as David said, was a roadmap for translating those very lofty goals into specific actions that would get things done. And I might say there's tremendous support, not just from the DEI committee, I think from many throughout the board, and in particular, the chair of the board has been an active member of the DEI committee, as a matter of fact. So, and I think that's important to acknowledge. And one other thing I'll say about the DEI committee, David had talked about how excited we are about this concept of a of having raised some money for a kind of internship program for period training in period instruments. And I think that idea was not only supported by the DEI committee, but the idea of fellowships in particular was, I think, generated pretty much from the committee, I think, David. So, so I just want to mention that because it's, while we have a fantastic, really a fantastic staff and leadership, we also have an engaged DEI committee. So, as I mentioned, we have to, and David and Lily indicated, translate those lofty notions into specific actions that would get things done, and importantly, being able to measure through that dashboard. So the board, in addition to the many initiatives taken by the staff, which you heard about, David and Lily talked about, the board has done the following in the last 2 years. First, like many, it's worthy of note that like many New England nonprofits, Handel and Haydn has had 2 boards, a board of governors and a board of overseers. We have changed the name of the board of overseers to the board of advisors, which more accurately describes its role. Secondly, we have eliminated the mandatory $5,000 financial commitment for advisors so that we can open up membership to younger members who are not yet advanced enough in their careers to afford gifts of that magnitude. We do ask all board members to contribute. We ask that the specific amount be meaningful to them, but we no longer have a fixed minimum. Third, we've created an interest group of board members dedicated to making connections between H&H and new audiences we want to attract. David had alluded to this, and the work of our relatively new audience development manager, Michael Walk, which, and I'm very excited about that role in Michael's work. There is a report on Handel and Haydn's DEI activities at every board meeting, either verbally or in writing. And again, I think that's important because we want to have the board consistently engaged throughout. So that happens at every meeting. We have collected demographic data on the board, so we'll be able to develop a baseline that shows where we need to focus our diversity efforts. The chair of the DEI committee, which is me, as I indicated, is also on the nominating committee and the executive committee. The nominating committee as a subcommittee that's specifically tasked with increasing the diversity of our nominating pipeline. And finally, I'll just acknowledge, having said all of that, clearly we have a long way to go. And importantly, we recognize that. For example, of our 70 governors and advisors, only 7 are people of color. And we do, many of us seem to be long in tooth too as well. So we do want to engage more youth. So the point is, the work continues, but we're excited about it. And we're ready to continue to be engaged. So thank you very much. And, maybe later on, David, if there are questions, be glad to respond.
All right, thank you very much, Jamie. Yeah. I am really delighted to introduce Reggie Mobley, who's joining us from somewhere in Germany. You're working on several exciting projects right now. As I mentioned earlier, I asked Reggie to help us diversify our programming a couple of years ago with the repertoire that we weren't performing. And he is such a creative and brilliant and passionate and inspiring partner in that effort. I just want to throw it to you, Reggie, to kind of just discuss your projects in that regard with us.
Sure. Hey, y'all. I am here in Regensburg in Bavaria. So it's more than several hours in your future. But what I do want to say is that it's actually not that, but it's the past that I think that's important in helping us kind of secure and make sure that the future that comes works for everyone and serves and assists everyone. And so I think to really kind of help describe my role as programming consultant, I should just briefly tell you how it all started. This was all several years ago, leading into the bicentennial celebration for H&H. And the VP of Artistic Planning sent me an email and said, Reggie, we know you, of course, as a fantastic soloist, but have you considered just kind of shifting over 6 feet and turning around? And I hadn't considered that, but the opportunity was one that I was more than happy to take on. And so what we did was we were partnering with the Museum of African American History, and they wanted a program with H&H of the music of Black American choral composers. Knowing H&H is a period ensemble, I thought, well, let's not just work on performing the music of composers who exist now, but I want to dig back as far as possible and show not just that there has always been a presence of Black musicians within classical music, but the fact that we are in many ways the backbone of what American music is in general. And so the program went very well, and to the point that it was repeated several years. And then eventually it moved on to a new venue in the historic area of Roxbury. And it's there that I decided that we should try something completely different. I was, for a short while, a psychology major, and I was very fond of Gestalt theorem of Fritz and Laura Perros. And as my own philosophy, I believe that the arts, what we do is not just entertainment. It's not just beautiful music and beautiful art, but it's also a service. What we do is also a service. Music exists for people, to help people. We are the backstop for civilization. We keep things going, and we are why things can work and should work. And so we created this program that we called Every Voice. And what I did is, like a Gestalt, I decided that I wanted to break apart the community of Boston into its separate parts and show that there is a strength in every bit that makes up the whole of Boston. And if we all could see just how resilient and how strong all of us are together, I think that as a community, we would be stronger, and there would be more empathy, more compassion, more understanding, and just more camaraderie between us all. And so these concerts were kind of set up to showcase various parts of the Boston community with music, not just of the present time, but also as early as possible as I could find. The earliest composers for female composers, queer composers, Black composers, Latino composers, everything that we could possibly do. And these concerts were pretty popular in the area, to the point that in my neighborhood, Jamaica Plain, there occasionally are people from the Latin Quarter who would stop me on the street on the way to Whole Foods and say, so when's the next Every Voice concert going to be? I can't wait to see the next one. And I just, well, this is amazing. This is actually kind of working. And apparently it was, because at some point David asked me to his office. And at this point I said, well, okay, this is it. He's cutting the line. We've done enough of this Every Voice stuff. Time to get back to singing and facing the audience. And instead he said, I want more. And that was incredible. Not what I expected, but it really changed things, because he saw the way that these concerts were affecting these various communities and areas and the people that attended. And it was time to bring this home. It was time to put, our money where our mouth is, and show that this is not just something we're interested in doing, in the corners and outskirts around the near Back Bay, but that this is something that H&H is and believes in. As a city of first, and H&H being one of the first, it's kind of our responsibility to lead and show that we have something to show the world. And so through that, he developed, and we created this programming consultant role, where my work is to show that even though Handel and Haydn are the two names in the letterheads, it's not a period, it's an ellipsis. It continues on. It's not just Handel and Haydn, but it is Bach, it is Rameau, it is Isabel Leonarda, it's Ignatius Sancho, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. Music is everyone, and there are so many people that have been involved for so very long. And so it's time to kind of unwhitewash and unstraightwash music history and show that this is something that belongs to everyone. And so one idea that I had was, well, because of reasons, there's really only so much music that does exist for people of color from the 17th, 18th, 19th century. There is some, but there's not a ton. And because of reason, there's not a lot that can exist on a stage like Symphony Hall. And so we came up with the idea of basically paying forward and retroactively bringing the music of someone that existed to an important stage like Symphony Hall. And so we partnered with Jonathan Woody, and he took the music of Ignatius Sancho, who, if you know of him, born 1729 on a slave ship from headed to the New World. His mother died in childbirth, and his father took his own life rather than live as a slave. He was then taken to London, where he was sold to three sisters, where the Duke of Montagu just fell in love with Sancho and taught him to read, write, play, and compose. Sancho, after the Duke's death, escaped and took refuge with the widow. And there he became a man of letters. He was known as kind of the part of the Black British elite. And because he was a shop owner as well, he was the first Black person to ever vote in parliamentary elections in the UK. This is an amazing story of a Black composer that no one knows. We know everything about Mozart, but we don't know about the Chevalier de Saint-Georges. We know everything about Purcell, but we don't know about Sancho. And the thing that's important is not just that this music deserves to be shared, but it's important to understand that people that look like me, that look like Jamie, that look like Lily, there have been people that look like us that have been doing this from the very beginnings. I'm currently on a tour in Germany with John Elliott Gardner and Monteverdi Choir, performing the work of Schütz and Bach. And the big thing about Schütz is that his writing was most important in the early 1600s at the beginning and during the 30 Years' War. When the 30 Years' War started in 1618, it was only a year later that the first slave ships reached Jamestown. Early music to us in Europe is also actually early music to us in America. The beginnings of what we have comes from these things. Slave songs and spirituals were created and sung in fields just as Bach and Handel and Haydn were writing. And it's important that we understand that this is not only valid as this is American early music, this is early music. And this is the backbone to everything else that we have here in the US and beyond. And it helps to kind of show that we are kind of here to facilitate what's important about all of this. And so through the concerts like that, and it's also the Crossing the Deep, which is a concert that came out of the kind of scandal out of London that Handel was involved with the slave trade. And there's a huge discussion behind that, and that can go on forever, and that's another conversation at a bar with a lot of whiskey and scotch, please. But the point is that we wanted to take that opportunity to actually show that during this time when Handel's music was being written and performed, so was the music that came from people that looked like us. And so we're working to show the community of Boston and beyond that this music stands the test of time and stands next to that of the music that we put on Symphony Hall stages and Carnegie Hall and everywhere else. This is very important and it's very relevant, and it's what will help us move into the future. So this is just kind of a taste of what I'm doing and hope to do, and there'll be more. And just realize that I'm from Florida originally, and I come from a place where we have invasive species like pythons and kudzu. And because I come from a place that has invasive species, I believe in invasive ideas. And the point for me speaking here isn't just to share with what we're doing, but to show that these are ideas and things that you can take yourself and to move on into your communities and cater and understand that your ensemble doesn't just rest in a city, but it belongs to the community as well.
All right, yeah. So you can see how much fun it is to work with these two gentlemen. I want to close with just one slide left. And here we go. All right, so H&H has done Handel's Messiah since 1857. We premiered it in 1817 in the US and have done it every year since 1857. We've gotten pretty good at it. After the 2019 production, which was conducted by Masaki Suzuki, I received this email. I just want to close by reading it to you. December 2, 2019. David, we have not met, but I've had the pleasure of attending H&H concerts over the years. I write today about the opening of this year's Messiah simply to congratulate and thank you. As you might imagine, I've heard many Messiahs over the years, but what I experienced on Friday evening was like no other. The sheer beauty and power of the orchestra and chorus never fails me, but this year's performance was buttressed by the amazing soloists. Mr. Mobley with Mr. Burton, Ms. Watts, and Mr. Fawn are not only the future of classical music, they are now of the best of classical music. Thank you for your attention to and support of casting that reflects the city we live in. It makes a huge difference for me as a Black man, and I imagine it matters to all who are enveloped in the oft warm and luscious sounds of the ensembles and the soloists. I'm always proud of the classical music scene here in Boston, but my chest puffed out with pride on Friday night. Thank you and your colleagues for giving me that boost. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is relevance. Thank you. Any questions anyone has at this point? Again, you're going to get all this, in your app so you can read it. Yes, ma'am.
So it was mentioned that you guys have been working with the African American Museum in order to, do research on Black composers and how they've contributed to this periods of music. What resources are you looking at in order to find music from more ethnicities that there might be less scholarship on?
I don't know if Reggie's still with us, but he would, I'm sure, love to answer that. Is it possible to bring him back? Isabel Leonarda is one.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. The question was about research on composers of other ethnicities besides Black that we're doing work on, like Isabel Leonarda, for instance, comes to mind as a. But I know you're looking at Brown composers, et cetera. So you talk about any research you're doing in that area?
Yes, by just contacting and working with people in these communities, and also musicologists and scholars who may have further interest or knowledge about other composers. I was introduced to a lot of the composers that I know, and so I have no problem with going to and just asking around and asking what can happen. Particularly, like there's a Cuban Baroque composer, Esteban Salas. He was the first and only real Baroque composer out of Havana, and because I worked a lot in Miami, there are a lot of scholars who do, Cuban scholars who do know about him. And so I've been able to get tons of scores and tons of information about him. And I'm hoping to do some new and bigger projects with him sometime in the future. Also, because I live in Europe, I do have access to other libraries and archives here, and working now with the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK to kind of see if I can dig and find evidence of other things that may have just been overlooked throughout time. So yeah, we're not just focusing on Black composers, but on everyone, and doing our best to just cast a wide net and find out what's out there and what needs to be heard and done and shared.
Good. Thank you. Time for maybe one more? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm with the Gogo Symphony, which mixes African-American hip-hop related beats with classical music. And we're very successful in attracting African-American audiences. And I was wondering if you ever thought of mixing their music they already like with music that you're trying to reach them with. And that's the best way to engage a community is music to music.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. We are committed to, it's part of our core values that we're a period instrument ensemble. So music that works with those kinds of instruments, we're happy to do. I think this work also showed, though, that there's a lot of potential for growth among people of color who like classical music. It's not about, we're not going after the world in general. So I think that's a very hopeful sign for us, but I certainly applaud what you're doing. Yeah, one more maybe. Okay, all right. Well, look, you have lunch now, I think. Thanks very much for coming. I hope it was useful to you. You'll all get the presentation. Thank you.